Good Shabbos now. But if you want to sound like you're in the know, it's a guten Erev Shabbos, because it's still Friday, just into the afternoon now, but Shabbos hasn't started. Let me just unplug my phone here so we don't get disturbed. There we go. All right. Let me get the video in front of me so I could see people's comments. Okay, beautiful. And the YouTube side. How you guys doing? Are you excited for Shabbos? This week was difficult. In some ways, exhausting, emotionally exhausting. So much stuff happened. What a treat. Shabbos begins tonight. We can enjoy our families. We can relax. We can just be. That's really the gift of Shabbos, to just be. Come on, YouTube. Come in so I can see who's with us. All right. It'll come in momentarily, I'm sure. Okay. Who's there? James Roth is in the house in Indianapolis. Beautiful. Elise Iser, welcome. Andrew Lewis Shivers says Shabbat Shalom. Where else are you, my good friends? Where else are you tuning in from? Is YouTube gonna join us? I don't know why it's so difficult. All right, Nina's sharing it into some groups so that, I don't know if we're broadcasting on YouTube. We should be. I hope we are. Live stream. I'm going to give it one more try. There it is. YouTube always lagging a little bit. Okay, great. Awesome. Who else is with us? Andrew Lewis Shivers, Jibbin Rye. Did I say that right? I'm sorry if I didn't. Bob Book says hello, AT. Joyce Noach. Eva Sacerdote says Shabbat Shalom from Malta. We had a great article in Ami Magazine about the Malta community, a very ancient community there in the Mediterranean. Fascinating, fascinating story. I hope to visit someday, Malta. So welcome to the show. It's so great to have you with us. Paul Garcia from San Antonio, Texas. Sean Rothberg says hi from Dallas. Josephine, also from Texas. Rick Wise from Nashville. Celsa Canedo from Pasadena, Texas. Elizabeth from Luxembourg. Welcome. Great to have you with us. Barbara from British Columbia. And Marianne Baddeley says Shabbat Shalom from Shropshire. Did I say it right? Shropshire? In the UK. It's great to be with you, my holy brothers and sisters. All right, today's show should not be very long. I know, every Friday people are in a mad rush to get ready for Shabbos. So let's just do some learning together and make it efficient. There's going to be some beautiful stuff here today. We are in Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. We're on Daf 70, page 70. We're in chapter 7, and we're examining the first Mishnah, which has to do with the person who forgot that it's Shabbos and how we deal with that, or forgot what Shabbos is, or forgot what are the prohibited labors on Shabbos so that he could observe Shabbos, and how we handle that situation. We've been dealing with various permutations of that. And just to review what we did is yesterday a little bit, we saw the difference between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish on what it means to commit an unwitting transgression of a Shabbos prohibition. Rabbi Yochanan says, even if you know that something is prohibited, that it's prohibited to do work on Shabbos, but you didn't know that the punishment is excision, right? That the soul will be cut off. And we're a little unclear about exactly what that means. The Hebrew word is kares, and our sages will dispute exactly what that punishment is, but it's bad. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, if a person didn't know that kares is the punishment for an intentional violation, so then he can't violate intentionally. He has to know both the prohibition and the punishment and still do it in order for it to be an intentional violation. And his good friend and disputing partner, an argumentation and debate partner, Reish Lakish, says, no. For you to be considered unwitting, that you didn't do it intentionally, you have to be ignorant of both the fact that it's prohibited and what its punishment is. It's a sort of higher standard. Reish Lakish is holding us to a higher standard, but the law follows Rabbi Yochanan. Even if people knew that they weren't supposed to be doing work on Shabbos, but they didn't know that the Torah forbids it with a heavy hand, right? And says that if you do that intentionally, the punishment is kares. But if you didn't know the punishment, it's enough. You wouldn't have done it if you knew. So since you didn't know, it's an unwitting transgression, according to Rabbi Yochanan. On today's page, the Gemara asks, from where do we derive a source in the Torah for this idea that if a person knew what Shabbat is, right? He knows that there's a thing called Shabbat, that we're not supposed to work on it, and that it applies to Jews. And he knew that this particular day was Shabbat, right? He was aware of the calendar, but he didn't know that, this particular labor was prohibited or that particular labor was prohibited. So it was an unwitting transgression. When he learns what his mistake was, he needs to bring a sin offering, a chatas, for each different category of violation, of prohibition that he violated. Where is there a source in the Torah for that, is what the Gemara is asking. And so the sage Shmuel answers. In Exodus 31:14, which is one of several places where the Torah commands us that we must observe Shabbos, right? The Torah is very clear, you must keep Shabbos. In fact, it's one of the 10 commandments, right? So the 10 commandments are mentioned twice in the Torah, but the additional, what's the word I'm looking for? Like exhorting the Jews to keep Shabbos. It's mentioned several times. That's how important it is that we must keep Shabbos. At Exodus 31:14, what it says is, it's usually translated into English as, let me just get it here in front of me. And you shall observe the Shabbat, for it is holy to you. He who desecrates it shall surely die. That's how it's usually translated, shall surely die. I'm almost reminded of the movie Airplane, right? Surely you wouldn't violate that law. I might, and don't call me Shirley, right? But this idea of translating it as shall surely die is just a way to get the concept into English. But if you can read the Hebrew, what it actually says is mot yumat, or in a more Ashkenaz pronunciation, mois yumos, right? Meaning, die, you will die, right? There is a repetition of the verb to die. And we see this in the Torah all the time, that the way Hebrew gives emphasis often is not by using a word like surely or very, but rather it repeats the verb, right? You die, you will die. Or in this case, mois, you must, right? And that repetition, it's there for emphasis, but it also creates an opening for the sages to make an interpretation, because it didn't need to double the verb. It says, if you violate this, you will die. But instead it says, if you violate this, you will die, right? So Shmuel comes in and he says, from this we learn that each of the labors of Shabbos brings its own punishment, that there's a punishment for each of the labors that you violate. Interestingly, it's not, if you sort of, let's say that the prohibition that you're violating is on writing. You're not allowed to write on Shabbos. So if you write, let's say you sign a document, you can't do that on Shabbos. So if you did it, you violated. And then you sign another document. And then you realize you shouldn't have done that on Shabbos, it was prohibited. Do you bring 2 sin offerings because you signed 2 documents? Answer, no. Because if you had known that writing was prohibited on Shabbos, you wouldn't have signed either document. So the sages say what you bring, what you owe, is a sin offering for each category of labor that was violated. How do we know that there are 39 prohibited labors? Now, the prohibited labors are related to the fact that the children of Israel, when we were in the desert and we received the instruction at Mount Sinai, the first thing that was commanded to us, along with these other laws, as a creative project, is you shall build the tabernacle, right? Called the Mishkan in Hebrew. So the tabernacle was the first holy temple. It was a portable holy temple. It went with us in our travels through the desert for 40 years. Then when we entered the Promised Land, it was in a few different cities, mostly at Shiloh, and eventually it made its way to Jerusalem during the kingdom of David. And then it would be David's son, Solomon, about 400 years after we entered the Promised Land and the tabernacle made its way into the Promised Land. And that was the center of worship where the Kohanim, the priests, would bring the sacrifices on behalf of the people. It was only after 400 years that it was replaced by a structure made out of stone and wood, meaning the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And then the first temple would stand for another 400 years. There would be a break of about 70 years during the Babylonian exile, and then it would be rebuilt and replaced with the second temple. That one would be destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era, and we're still waiting for the third temple to be rebuilt. But the labors of Shabbat, the 39 labors of Shabbat, are derived from the activities that were necessary to build the Mishkan, the original tabernacle in the desert. All of the labors necessary to build that structure, to craft all its holy things, the altar and the table for the showbreads and the curtains and the planks and the wood and the beams and the sockets and the loops and the cloth and the clothing of the priests, etc. Creating all of those ritual objects and the tabernacle itself are the labors. So maybe we could just count them, right? But once you start categorizing and counting types of labor, it gets a little tricky what's actually a separate labor and what's embedded within one. And so the sage is actually looking into the Torah to say, well, is there a place where we can find that count? And then let's see if it's reflected in reality. And that's what we're looking at right now. Rabbi Nassan says it's right here in the Torah. This is how we know that the number is going to add up to 39, and that indeed when they looked, the number matched, right? There were 39 types of activities required to build the Mishkan, but the number 39 was already there and available through hermeneutical interpretation in the Torah. And where do we find that? It says, these are the things that you shall not do on Shabbos. Literally, it says, these are the things. Ele hadevarim. Ele, so remember that in Hebrew, all of the Hebrew letters are also numbers. And this is the entire field of gematria, where we can find hidden meanings in words because every letter corresponds to a number. Aleph is 1, Base is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalet is 4, etc. And so when we have two words whose letter values add up to the same total, it's not necessarily true, but it's certainly, then we take a look. Is there a relationship with these two words whose letters add up to the same sum? And often by taking that look, we'll find interesting connections. Here, Ele hadevarim, Ele, these, it's Aleph, Lamed, Hey, that adds up to 36. Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, Hey is 5, that's 36. And then the word hadevarim, the things, the definite article the was unnecessary, and so that adds 1. Devar, thing, that's 1. And the plural, im, adds another, right? Because it could have just said, don't do work on Shabbos. Because the Torah says, these are the things you shall not do. And then it doesn't list the categories. It doesn't list all 39. It just says, these are the things you shall not do. From this, our sages derive that there are 39. then they go looking for the 39, and indeed they find 39 activities. So only a few are actually spelled out separately. For example, kindling, the Torah, and gathering, right? So the Torah mentions that there was somebody who was gathering and that was prohibited. Likewise, it says you shall not kindle fire in your homes. So I think it's Reb Nosson who asks, well, why was kindling, or the Gemara asks, and Reb Nosson will answer, why is kindling stated separately? Maybe it's a different kind of prohibition than the other 39. And Rabbi Nosson answers, no, it's to give you an example. Here's an example of one of those 39. You can't light a fire on Shabbos, and along with that, you can't extinguish a fire. But it's not, worse or less bad than the other 38. It's an example of one of those 38. And for all of these, right, if you violate them intentionally, this is a punishment of kares, and if you do it unwittingly, so then you can atone for that mistake by bringing the sin offering in the temple or in the tabernacle, depending on which period of history you're in. Or if you live now, so you can't bring a sin offering, and instead you just study what you would do if you could, but what you do when you violate Shabbos and you realize that you've done it, right, is you make an atonement. I mean, you examine what led me to do that, what was I thinking, what was I unaware of, was the problem that I was ignorant, I wasn't educated enough, or was I just lazy, or was I just willful and I did what was pleasing to me without really thinking about it? Can I do better next time? And as we shall see, I'm going to come back to this at the end of the class, but as we'll see, when we make that effort, even if we're not able to immediately get to the level where, we're super religious like the most religious people, that's not going to be realistic for a lot of us. Making any kind of an effort to improve ourselves and to rise spiritually brings about great reward and is very respected in heaven, as it were. So we'll come back to that. So now that we understand that there are 39 categories of prohibited labors on Shabbos, so then the question is, so if I violated several prohibitions during a time that I didn't know it was Shabbos, right? So there's a double unawareness here. Let's say I didn't know that I'm not supposed to write on Shabbos, and I didn't know that I'm not supposed to carry things in the public domain. Let's say I didn't know that. And I also didn't know that it was Shabbos, right? So then I find out that, actually that was Shabbos. I thought it was Tuesday, but in fact it was Saturday. And I did two things that I didn't know were prohibited. So now how many sin offerings am I liable for? And the answer is one, right? One, because the main thing that you didn't know is that it was Shabbos. Had you known it was Shabbos, then you wouldn't have done prohibited work. Now, you also didn't know that you're not allowed to write and you're not allowed to carry. But the sort of main thing, according to the Mishnah that we're in, is that you didn't know the date. If you knew the date, you wouldn't have done violations. Then we can establish, well, what more information did you need? But the bigger information is that you didn't know that it was Shabbos. And so to sort of help understand that part of it, let me just read how it's put in the Talmud, and we'll break this down a little bit. So the Gemara further discusses the matter from a different perspective. We learned in the Mishnah the number of primary categories of prohibited labors on Shabbat are 40 less 1, meaning 39. Which the Mishnah proceeds to list. That's going to be later when we encounter that Mishnah. And we discussed in this Mishnah, why do I need this tally of 40 less 1? Isn't merely listing the prohibitions sufficient? Why do I need to know there's 39? Why don't I just get into what they are? And Rabbi Yochanan said the tally was included to teach that if he performed all the prohibited labors in the course of one lapse of awareness, during which he was unaware of the prohibition involved, he is liable for each and every one. So if I knew that it was Shabbos, then I'm going to be liable for each category of labor that I did anyway, unwittingly, right? Because I didn't know it was prohibited. Now, granted, if you say that one who had a lapse of awareness of both this and that, the fact that it's Shabbos and that the labor is prohibited, is liable for each and every one, it works out well. However, if you say that since one who had a lapse of awareness of this and that had a lapse of awareness with regard to Shabbat, and he is liable to only bring one sin offering, under what circumstances can you find a case where one would be liable for unwittingly violating all 39 labors, right? This is the idea of bringing in the tally. Why do I need to know the total number? Isn't it just enough that, okay, for each category that I violate, I'm going to owe? Why is it that I need to know the total? Because there's a chance that I violated everything. It must be in a case where, with regard to Shabbat, his actions were intentional and he was aware that it was Shabbat, and with regard to the prohibited labors, his actions were unwitting, as he was unaware that these labors were prohibited on Shabbos. It works out well if he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said, once he was unwitting with regard to the fact that the punishment for his transgression is charis, even though he was aware that his action was in violation of a Torah prohibition and performed the transgression intentionally, he is considered to have sinned unwittingly, right? According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's unwitting, even if we knew something was prohibited, but we didn't know what the punishment was. You find that possibility in a case where he was aware that performing labor on Shabbat involves violation of a Torah prohibition, but he was unaware that the punishment for violating that prohibition is charis. However, if he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Resh Lakish, who said that for you to do something unwittingly means both you didn't know it was prohibited and you didn't know what the punishment was. If you knew it was prohibited, it doesn't matter whether you knew what the punishment was, and you did it anyway, right? So this is the case of a lot of people who have no real Jewish education, but they know that they're not supposed to drive the car on Shabbos. They know religious people don't do that. So they know they're not supposed to do that. They have no idea the ins and outs of this, the particulars, what the punishment is. But they know that Jews don't drive on Shabbos and they do it anyway. So is that an intentional violation of Shabbos? According to Rabbi Yochanan, no. According to Reish Lakish, yes. So the question then arises, with regard to what aspect of Shabbat was he aware? Right? So for a person to be unwitting with respect to the labors, according to the definition of Reish Lakish, it would mean that he knows that there's something called Shabbat, but he's unaware of any law prohibiting him from doing any activity, right? In order to be liable to bring sin offerings for the labors, for the categories of labor. So the question the Gemara is asking is, well then, what does he think Shabbat is? If he's unaware that you're not supposed to do these kinds of work, then what is Shabbat to this person, is what the Gemara is asking. And the answer that's given is, well, he might be aware that according to Rabbi Akiva, you're not supposed to walk more than 2,000 cubits away from your home. You know, if you're not in a walled city and there's not some kind of Erev that expands your domain, you can't walk more than 2,000 cubits away from your domicile on Shabbos. So he might have known that, and he might have thought that that's what Shabbos is, even though he was unaware that you're not supposed to work on Shabbos, right? And that's how they get into it and try to understand what it is that a person thinks Shabbos is. Now, I think we can add to that, well, maybe what a person thinks Shabbos is, it's like a beautiful, holy time to be with your family. That's what it's all about. And they don't realize that they're not supposed to work. But I think what the sages are telling us is, listen, if you've been exposed to this at all, you got to realize that you need to grow in your knowledge. And you're not going to be able to overnight learn all of the rules of Shabbos and then be held to that high standard for violating any of them. And this brings us to the little point I wanted to make before. I ended up researching this today. It has to do actually with eating, with kosher eating. I was asked to write an op-ed piece for the Forward, which I'm going to finish later today, before Shabbos for sure, God willing, otherwise over the week, on Sunday, and then I can hand it in. But it's because, big news around here in California, coffee bean and tea leaf is rescinding its kosher certification. Kosher bean and tea leaf, I mean, since what, 1963, has been kosher. It's a chain of wonderful coffee shops, you know, high quality, high end, well known coffee bean and tea leaf. And it was a real blessing. Not every single coffee bean, like the one at LAX airport, was not kosher, but almost all of the locations were. I mean, hundreds of them. And the chain was sold a couple years ago to a Philippine fast food outfit called Jollibee. And the new owners, you know, really don't care about kosher. For them, I guess it's a financial decision. It costs too much to keep the shops kosher. It's not worth it to them. And so they're not going to pay the money to have the kosher supervision. And now all the coffee bean and tea leaves are not going to be kosher. And it sucks. It sucks. You know, it was such a nice thing, such a convenience that there's so many coffee bean locations. And when you're on the road or you want to meet somebody who's not kosher, it's a very nice place. Both people can eat and they can eat decent food. And you can just rely on it being kosher. It was a great convenience. It made things easier for the kosher community. And now we're going to lose that. But maybe keeping kosher isn't supposed to be convenient. Maybe it's not supposed to be easy. These rules, the rules of kashrut, like the rules of Shabbos. Now, I firmly believe, as Nina likes to say, and I think we heard it from Y.Y. Rubenstein, Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein, Shabbat is not something we have to do, it's something we get to do. It is something we get to do, but it is also something we have to do. We're commanded to do it. And sometimes it doesn't seem so nice or so convenient or so fair, right? And once you buy into it, once you fully Shomer Shabbos, you can't believe you didn't keep it before because it's such a blessing in our lives. But as you get used to it, it takes a lot of getting used to. Kosher eating, so much more, right? It's really difficult to keep kosher, especially like you're a person who wasn't, and then you're rising in your level of observance, and then you're going to start keeping kosher, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I'm giving up all those restaurants, all those non-kosher restaurants. I mean, you know, I used to be a Jew, didn't keep kosher. I know how good the food is around the world and such wonderful restaurants. It was a really difficult thing to say goodbye to all those fine, fine restaurants. So we made the sacrifice. And the thing is, it's not easy. It's not convenient, but the rewards are many. The rewards are many when you go out of your way. And so it's sort of researching that piece. So I found this other passage in Tractate Chulin, which addresses the laws of eating. And it's just so beautiful. So in the school of Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught that transgression stupefies the heart of a person who commits it. In other words, when you accustom yourself to transgression, it seems like no big deal. In fact, elsewhere in the Talmud, it also says that in the beginning, you know, when a person who already knows what the law is, but they just convince themselves that it's okay. So you know, the sin, it's so easy to commit it. It's the attachment to sin. It's like, you don't really need to do it. I kind of want to do it. You could walk away from the sin. So the attachment to it is like a spider thread. But then when you accustom yourself to do sin, that attachment grows thicker and thicker until it's a cart rope, right? Likewise, when you're in that world of just transgressing and not doing the things that Jews are commanded to do, you just get used to it. You don't even think about it, and that kind of the tendency to transgress becomes, you know, like you're just dull to it. It dulls the heart, right? The heart becomes stupefied. You don't realize you're doing something wrong. But the sages taught the following with regard to the verse, and do not impurify yourselves with them, so that you should not be thereby impurified. It's kind of another case of this kind of repetition, right? It's this kind of repetition about being impurified. And this is in Leviticus 11:43. Why does it repeat, and do not impurify yourselves with them, so that you should not be thereby impurified? It could have just said, don't impurify yourself. And a person, so that the Gemara teaches, the sages teach, a person who impurifies himself a bit, they impurify him greatly. They meaning the heavenly host, right? In heaven, they make it easier for you to keep impurifying yourself. However, the converse is also true. And the sages taught that if you sanctify yourself, you will be sanctified. That's also Leviticus 11, verse 44. And a person who sanctifies himself a bit, they sanctify him and assist him greatly. So when you start to say, hey, I want to do better, I want to hold myself to a higher standard. Right now we're talking about kosher eating, and we started by talking about keeping Shabbos, but I'm telling you that this applies to every Jew about every law, and to every person when what you're trying to do is to refine yourself so that you can reach your spiritual potential. Any effort you make in that direction impresses heaven. It impresses the heavenly host. Said, look at this person. She's trying. She's making an effort. She's trying to grow out of where she was and rise to a higher spiritual level and achieve a little bit more of her spiritual potential, to achieve more of her spiritual mission in this world. Let's help her. And when you slip out and say, whatever, I'm just tired, I don't want to deal with it. The people I hang out with, they don't do that stuff. Why should I do that stuff? So then they're unimpressed. And they're like, okay, well, so we're not going to help them, right? The lesson is, there's great reward for trying. Or as our dear friend Schwartzy said, it really doesn't matter where you are on the ladder. It matters what direction you are moving. And if you're going up even just half a rung at a time, even a quarter rung at a time, they love it up in heaven. God loves it, instructs his angels to come and give help. And you can feel it. You can feel it. When you're on that road and trying to make an improvement and reach more of your spiritual potential, you feel like angels are assisting you. It's a beautiful process. And it is most definitely not a linear process. We're going to move forward and feel like we're being helped, and then we're going to slip and, just get a little sullen or get in a bad mood or just feel bored or just feel uninterested, and we slip a little bit back. But as long as we have this general drive to rise and fulfill more of our spiritual potential, we're going to get quite a bit of help from heaven in that process. Okay, that is what I've got for us today. Let me see if there are comments or questions. You could put them in the comments right now. It is great to see you all. Exactly. Zipporah says the death punishment is also sometimes used to make a point about the severity of breaking Shabbos, but just like the rebellious child would never be stoned, it doesn't take place. Now that's in terms of a death penalty at the hands of the court. But here, in terms of violating the labors of Shabbos, we're actually talking about charis. So that would be death from the heavenly court, right? In terms of an earthly court, for violating Shabbos, it never happened. It just never happened. And what Zipporah is alluding to is the gluttonous child, right? So it's supposed to happen at the hands of the earthly court, right? If your son is a glutton and a drunkard, you're supposed to take him to the gate of the city and stone him, so that we shouldn't have, this totally materialistic, overeating, sensory addicted person who just only cares about pleasure and doesn't care about other people. But when the rabbis had to define, well, what constitutes a glutton, it would be like, well, somebody who drank, 30 bottles of beer in 1 hour, right? Or 30 barrels of beer. Like the definition was impossible, because they said that's not in our hands. right? That particular law was placed in the Torah to teach us that we don't need to go anywhere near those kinds of behaviors, right? But in terms of the death penalty here, what we're really talking about is where it's intentional or a heaven decreed early death for a person, but where it's unwitting, they need to go through a process of atonement, either by bringing a sin offering when there's a temple, or through prayer and reflection and repentance in a time when there's not a temple. Okay. Lynn Job says, people discuss kosher concerning the body and feel okay to ignore the command, but it is not about the body. Hashem said that we eat kosher so that you shall not contaminate your soul. Very good, Lynn. You know, we often hear among people who don't know better that, well, the reason that kosher laws existed in the ancient world was to protect the Jews from eating unhealthy things like pork. Pork was less healthy and that you could die from eating it, so it was just a health code. And that's false. That's false. The Torah has all kinds of laws which are called chukim, meaning law, or chukos, meaning laws that are supra-rational. They're not rational, right? It's not because it makes sense and it's just going to keep us healthy. And it was sort of like the health department would have said the same thing if they had better technology. No, when we distinguish between permitted and prohibited things, often, like you can't wear linen and wool. I mean, that's not to protect your health. It's just to make a distinction. It means that you have to be mindful in all of your eating. It means you have to separate yourselves. It means you can't go to those restaurants. You make a sacrifice, as it were, but all of the hours of your day become elevated when you're nourishing your soul, as it were, as Lynn is saying in her comment. Okay. And Ken Jennings says, not working is hard work. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But really, it's not that it's hard work, it's that it's more frustrating, right? An enforced rest in a society that just runs so hard sometimes feels like work, but it's not. And for people, you know, who aren't keeping Shabbos, but who are thinking about keeping Shabbos, I mean, just do this thought experiment. What if you turned off all your screens for 25 hours? If you're so used to that you'd never have 25 hours without a screen, so it's a little bit hard to imagine. But imagine it, right? And it means you're like, not only are you not dealing with your phone and your TV and your social media and your chat windows and your WhatsApps and all the people who demand your attention, etc. Not only are you not dealing with that for 25 hours, but nobody expects you to deal with that for 25 hours. And so when you have this spiritually refreshing Shabbos, where you're not dealing with that constant communication of the world. I mean, listen, when the laws of Shabbos were given, they didn't have the interconnected social media apparatus that we have today, and it was still an incredible blessing for people. Today, so much more. So much more. Because when you have that disconnected 25 hours, you are reconnected to the source of your soul, and that gives you every 7 days a period of reflection where you're free, liberated to evaluate, hey, is my life heading in the right direction? Did I accomplish last week what I wanted to accomplish for my family, for my community, for my mission in this world? Like, if you don't stop and reflect on that, then you're just lost in the race, lost in the rat race. And, you know, it's sort of like, how much of a chance can, imagine a huge maze, like in the movie The Shining, the kind of maze, you know, that's like an acre wide and you could get lost in. You could just be wandering in that maze all your life. But if every 7 days you get to climb up above the maze and look down on it and go, oh, okay, this is where I am, that's where I'm going. Okay, now I've recalibrated my priorities or reconfirmed my priorities. Now I know what direction to move in. It's such an important exercise, and I cannot recommend it enough. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. But Yehudis Fishman is with us from Boulder, Colorado. Mora Yehudis, a great and gifted Torah teacher. And she says, she tuned in late, but in terms of the ladder, there's a beautiful image from the Maggid of Mezrich that life is like a spiral staircase. And even though sometimes it seems like we can't see the top anymore, we are always going up and guided by heaven to advance our life's purpose. I like that spiral image, Yehudis, because sometimes it feels like we've just come around back to where we were, and did we make any progress at all? And the answer is yes. We came back around to where our perspective is on this side of the spiral, but God willing, we are a little bit higher. And even though it seems like we can't see any more than we could with the last time we were here, maybe the next time we come around, we'll get it, oh, that's what was going on. It just took me a while to come around. You know, we're not going to get perfect perspective every Shabbos, but if we keep observing them, then it comes around for sure sooner or later, like a real flash of insight about who we are, where we're going, what we need to do, who we're attached to, what's important, who we need to reach out to, who we need to confide in, who we need to comfort. That kind of thing, and what behaviors we need to change, that self-knowledge, taking that break every Shabbos, it's a blessing. That's all I can say. It's a blessing. My friends, I'm sending you all a big virtual hug. May we stay safe. May we grow in wisdom, spirituality, holiness, love, friendship every day. All the best, and have a great and peaceful Shabbos.